I'm stupid.
There, I think mine's going.
There.
Okay. Let me go around and start on time. Judge, you should vote pro because some students during this COVID-19 pandemic crisis are not able to access reliable or good education because of their unreliable or weak internet access. For example, let's take the Los Angeles United School District. According to K12.com, there were attendance rates as low as 0 to 25% in some classrooms. So this is completely unacceptable. We need students to be in school so they can learn. And this was mitigated by the district with $25 million used to increase attendance rates and to give their students better internet access through hotspots. Moreover, according to usfacts.org, there are 3.7 million students in the United States who have unreliable internet access. And at the very least, my plan can help bring these students to reliable internet access and get them more educational opportunities. Additionally, there are 56 million students currently enrolled in K-12 education. And a lot of those students, the majority of them, had to move into online education because of the pandemic. And a lot of these students, let's say 75%, at the very least, it's a very small percentage, let's say that amount of students didn't have reliable internet access because of whatever the circumstances are. That's 43 million students who are going to be denied of quality education because of a router that's not working. Lastly, people who are impoverished, students who are impoverished are denied of educational opportunities if they don't have this reliable internet. Lastly, according to usnews.com, Biden has supported a $130 billion plan and a $5 billion plan. In addition to the CARES Act of $2.2 trillion, there will certainly be no problem getting funding from our plan. Thank you. Reset, and you may begin.
Judge, you should vote against my opponent's plan. And you vote for the comp plan, which is to not provide every student with a hotspot. Simply because of two main points. A, providing every single student in the United States with a hotspot is simply cost inefficient. And B, because ultimately providing these cost inefficient hotspots to every student would be superfluous to some. Now, what do I mean by cost inefficient? On a study conducted by educationinformation.org, there are nearly 56.6 million students in the K-12 range in the United States. Now, this means that according to my opponent's plan, nearly 57 million hotspots will need to be provided to create this course of action. Now, by the most conservative estimates of PCMag.com, cell service or a hotspot from T-Mobile or Verizon can cost upwards of $25 per line. Now, using the lower end of this estimate to calculate the cost, this would mean that $25, again the lower end of the spectrum, times 56 million would be around $1.4 billion per month. That's $17 billion a year. Now, this would be a great thing if it worked. However, according to Javier Solomon of Hetchinger Report, students in rural communities do not need to use hotspots. They can't use hotspots because the cell towers are out of range of the hotspot. The hotspot
15 seconds.
Cell service to function. So ultimately, this 10 million students, as stated by education, they have a useless hotspot.
It is time, so it is break reset. And yeah. So yeah, go ahead. Start from So I will reset that, set this, full screen. So what do you have to say about the possibility that some of these hotspots can be purchased or funded by corporations or organizations that donate?
That wasn't provided in the pros case,
Mhm.
but in that case, then I would say that ultimately they would probably provide some, but it's in the corporation's best interest to not donate these expensive hotspots to students.
Why is it not in their best interest?
Because any amount of PR it'll give them is negated by the fact that they have to spend nearly $17 billion a year to fund this project.
Okay, and you also implied in your case that every single one of those 10 million enrolled students will not have access to reliable internet based on hotspots. Do you have a statistic for what percentage of those rural students may not have reliable internet with hotspots?
I don't have a statistic, but I can tell you that the majority do not have access to cell service.
Okay, so you're saying that just because a very small part of those rural students do not have access to reliable cellular data, which hotspots would use, that we shouldn't go through with the program at all?
I believe that there's better alternatives, but ultimately what the pro argued was providing a hotspot to every student. So I'm critiquing the statement of providing a hotspot to every student.
And what might those better alternatives be?
I'm not here to propose a counterpart.
Okay.
15 seconds.
Thank you. So reset, and I will begin, and you can start questioning.
So just to clarify your position on the topic, you want to provide hotspot to every student in America.
Yes.
Now, ultimately, would you agree that providing a hotspot to every student would create some superfluous cost?
It would not.
It would not. Why not?
It would not. Because although the cost may be in excess, the cost will be necessary. Because let's say, for example, students who already have reliable internet, they will not need it per se, but they may need a backup plan if their primary internet fails.
What about those students that simply can't use hotspots because of the area they live in?
Then I guess purchasing hotspots for those students, those small amount of students, would be a waste of money.
Superfluous.
Yes, not superfluous because it's necessary for those other students, but in their case, I would suppose it is superfluous.
So ultimately, go back. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you cited a statistic that only 0 to 25% of students in the LAUSD district actually attend school.
I did not say that. I said in some cases that attendance rates happen.
Now, could you do you think there's causation between poor cell service and this? Do you have any statistics to prove that there's causation?
The source that I pulled from did not say poor cell service. It said that unreliable internet, lack of access to technology, and lack of access to high-speed internet was the cause for that.
Now, how do you
15
like
seconds.
distributing these hotspots to students?
I could distribute these hotspots the same way that any school would distribute materials, resources, or anything of that sort.
Would this not create a large super spreader event?
No, it
you
would
go to
not,
schools?
because of the way that the hotspots would be distributed. And I believe that it is break time. Yes, it is. Reset, Control Tab, and I need to fix it. So now it is rebuttal time. Reset, do that. X9, 10, Judge, you should vote pro because as I have outlined, we will help millions of students across the United States with implementing my plan. Although, as my con opponent has pointed out, there may be some inefficiencies in the plan with the very small case, in a very specific case, of those 10 million students in rural areas. This cost should be accepted because of how many people we can reach and benefit. For example, those people in poverty that I mentioned that we can help. We can expand their educational opportunities with this slight inefficiency in rural areas. Most legislation that passes in Congress has some inefficiencies. So even if we have, let's say, $250 million in inefficiencies with that 10 million students and those $25 a month facts that my con opponent cited. $250 million out of that $17 billion, it's a very small percentage of inefficiencies. And even then, those $17 billion, as I stated, will certainly be funded by the CARES Act of $2.2 trillion, or that $135 billion Biden plan, or that other $5 billion Biden plan that was specifically made for instances like this. So let's go back to that $17 billion figure. We can easily cover a very large percent of that $17 billion per year with those $5 billion that I had cited. So Judge, you should vote pro because it will help the most amount of students and it will allow educational opportunities across the United States.
15 seconds.
Stop, reset, and your time starts now.
Judge, ultimately you should vote con, simply because the pro case does not solve the issue that it's trying to solve. And my opponent in the CX clearly admitted that some of this cost, the $17 billion, is going to be superfluous. He said the word himself. Now, ultimately, what does this mean? This means that my opponent has created a cost-heavy and unreliable system that doesn't solve the issue that it's trying to. So ultimately, we should seek better alternatives to my opponent's plan, and because of how inefficient it is, and because of how unreliable and ineffective hotspots are in rural areas. Now, I don't disagree that there needs to be something done. However, I think my opponent's plan is not the right way of solving the issue. Now, ultimately, it's not my place to propose a counter plan. However, I can critique his arguments of inefficiency and ineffectiveness. Now, this $17 billion is not a drop in the bucket, as my opponent has implied. This is a large sum of money that could be used in other programs that Biden has proposed, but instead it will be used to fund this program. So ultimately, I think we should, in conclusion, I think we should vote for the cons plan rather than the pros plan, because of how convoluted and ineffective the pros plan is. Thank you.
Okay, and that should be it. Reset. 2 minutes. Okay, I can stop the record.
I didn't